Hi guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to be talking about estate planning for wealthy families. This is going to be a three-part series where we're covering basically the parameters. The first part really going to be setting up your estate for success, how we actually do things during our lifetime, and the way that we structure our affairs so that it makes it easier to create a comprehensive estate plan that accomplishes the goals that you want to accomplish, gets rid of all the nastiness, and we'll talk about all these things as we go on. Part number two is going to be things that you should do while you're alive, what you need to put into place during your lifetime, what type of documents are needed during one's lifetime to make sure that you have advocates and that you don't have an estate wasted or taken advantage of, or otherwise leave yourself at the mercy of either a court or somebody that does not necessarily have your best interest to heart or is not looking at what you want to accomplish if you want to do legacy planning. It's just not appropriate to go into conservatorship or some of these things if you have the means to avoid them. And so we'll show you how to avoid it. We'll show you how to put things in place during your lifetime so that whatever you want to carry out, whatever values you want to pass on, get carried on. We'll get into that too. Number three is what happens when you pass. It's after you're gone. What did we put in place and how does it work? And what works for wealthy families? Over time, we have a really good roadmap in the United States as to what works and what doesn't. So, for example, a lot of you guys have heard about the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts. And one family created what we kind of talk about here, what we're going to be the concepts here, which is creating an entity, usually in the form of a trust, that does not allow access to principal, unfettered access, I should say, by your heirs. In other words, it puts some clamps down. And what ultimately occurs over a long period of time is it's in their best interest to do that. Versus the Vanderbilts, where it was much more freewheeling, where it was distributions out to folks. And here we are, two of the wealthiest families at the time, and you're 2 and 3 generations down the road. And what do we have? One of them is still worth billions of dollars, has still grown its wealth. The other one, there's not a single millionaire in the group. They had a family reunion, not a single millionaire in the group. How did they go from being one of the wealthiest families to not being one of the wealthiest? And I should say, when I say not a single millionaire, if you know some of the heirs, like Anderson Cooper's obviously somebody who's a millionaire, but it wasn't because of the fortune being passed down. The fortune is gone. You just have individuals now who are, kind of at their own, the mercy of themselves, as opposed to in the Rockefeller case, you have really two main trusts that continue to prosper to this day and are supporting massive amounts of family, but more importantly, supporting massive amount of philanthropy and values that the Rockefellers wanted to pass down to their kids. So we'll talk about how this takes place. In order to do this, I want to start off with some norms and some ideas that are going to guide us. Here's, for example, something that I take to heart, which is it's about control, not ownership. Control, not ownership. That's an important concept. I don't necessarily have to own something, but I should be able to control it. In estate planning, that's really, really important because you'll realize if I own everything in my name, I am going to be subject to all sorts of nasty transfer taxes, to estate taxes, to state estate taxes, to generation skipping taxes, all sorts of stuff that gets piled on, and it's a really large amount. So, for example, right now we have an estate tax exclusion of just over $12 million. Huge amount. It's been as low as 675,000 since I've been an attorney. And it could go back to any number. It could go back down to $1 million. It could go to 5 million, whatever it is. It's this magical number that they say, oh, we're not going to tax you on the transfer of that from a federal tax standpoint. States do their own thing. Some states, like I think it's Oregon, it might be $1 million threshold. And then you get taxed. What do you get taxed if your estate is worth more than that value? it starts at 40% on the federal side. In the state, it just varies. You even have an inheritance tax in some states. So you have to be aware of these things, that if I die and I pass things on directly to people, I get hit by these things, but I could avoid them. And how do I avoid them? It's by transferring ownership, true ownership, out of my name sometimes. A good example is, what if I put it into a charitable entity? What if I have a family foundation? It's not mine anymore. It's out of my estate. It's no longer subject to that type of taxation. And it's in a different realm where perhaps my heirs could serve on the board, continue to get paid, but it's not something that they can take. Their ex-spouses, their lawsuits, you name it, bad business decisions, cannot squander those funds. So we'll talk about that. If you do not own it, they cannot take it. If you do not own it, they cannot take it. That is a very important concept, and that's what the wealthy folks in the United States truly embrace. When you see a family that is successful, multi-generation, 9 times out of 10, it's because they realize that owning something and giving it directly to your children is a negative thing. In other words, if I gave my daughter 100% of my estate, she took this estate, a lot of it's dependent on what's going on in her life. What if she has a major auto accident? Could they take those assets? What if she gets divorced? What if she has a business partnership that goes awry? What if, just fill in the blank, what if she has a medical ailment? What if she ends up on life support and has massive medical bills? They could take anything in her realm. So if you don't own it, you can't take it. If I have heirs, no matter what occurs and they don't own, I didn't just give them an outright distribution of the asset, it's safe. If I give it to somebody, somebody can take it, and that includes me. Control is more important than ownership in our world, and that is a very, very important concept. So the other thing that I want to focus on is planning for what is known. In other words, there's certain things that we know is going to happen. So for example, statistically speaking, I could say that most Americans are going to go through some sort of lawsuit or interaction with our wonderful civil legal system, either through divorces or otherwise, about 5 times during their life. It's almost a guarantee that you're going to have to deal with it when you die, for sure. So we know that this stuff happens. So why aren't you preparing for it? We know that half the folks out there are going to need some sort of long-term care, some sort of assistance when they get older. So why aren't we preparing for it? So we are going to prepare for those things, and we're going to make sure that, number one, our estate isn't just open season for any creditor should something happen to us. Number two, we're going to make sure that it's maintained well enough that it can be transferred easily, as opposed to stuff everywhere that ends up having to go through a court process like probate. We want to avoid going to court to probate our estate. We want to avoid having to go get a judge to sign off on change of ownership. And the way that we do that is through entities. It's really simple, actually. There's a solution. It's just straight out there. For everything that we're talking about, there's a very simple solution. So here we go. We're going to go into 11, let's see if I could do this right, 11, right, estate concepts that you really have to implement and that you have to know to be successful in estate planning. So we want to create a legacy. This is how we do it. Number one, you want to protect your assets for the future. How do I protect my assets? So if I'm a real estate investor, for example, and I'm a stock market investor. My stocks don't cause liability. My real estate causes a ton of liability. So how do I protect my assets for the future? Well, there's 2 types of liabilities I have to be careful of. There's the asset itself, and let's say it's a house, a rental property. That could be an asset. I want to make sure that I am safe from that asset, so that I, sitting out here, and my spouse, sitting out here, if something bad happens over here, let's say we have a big fire, and we end up with a massive liability, that it does not come out here. We want to make sure that we're cutting that. And vice versa. We want to make sure that if I am driving a car, and by the way, let's be real. People always say, well, you just get insurance. There's certain things that insurance is going to be a pittance for. So let's say that I'm driving a car and I cause the negligence. I cause a car accident and it kills somebody who's a high income earner. Let's say it's a brain surgeon. They're 35 years old and they have 40 years of at least of $1 million plus a year. Like, that's going to be a massive lawsuit. And I'm sorry, but it's not going to, your insurance isn't going to cover it. You might have some liability coverage, and maybe this is a small percentage chance of happening. It still happens, and I've actually seen it happen. Not the neurosurgeon, but I've seen massive liability of wrongful death of young people, from landlords, from property management, from just oops on businesses, with millions and millions and millions of dollars of liability. And I've seen people have their estates wiped out. So when people say, oh, that never happens. Yeah, it does. It's rare, but it does happen. And who does it happen to? The wealthiest people, because they have the deep pocket. So it's worth going after them. So how do we protect this from that liability? That's called outside liability affecting your assets, inside liability of your assets affecting you. And then let's say you have money sitting in a safe. You want to make sure that neither of these could cause us to lose that. And it's actually fairly simple to put a plan together. Number one, there's something called security through obscurity. It's putting your assets in a structure where your name's not on a public record. And believe it or not, we can remove your name off of your home. We can move your name off of all your rental properties. We can even remove your name off of your brokerage account so that you control it, but you don't own the asset. You own the entity that owns the asset. And what that allows us to do is hit number two, which is consolidating all of our assets. Let's say that I have just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ... I have 50 pieces of real estate. I have a ton of residential real estate. I can have it all flowing up. It could be a series of LLCs. It could be land trust LLCs. It could be limited partnerships. I don't really care. But I could have one holding entity that controls it all, make this a partnership. And there's some reasons to do that for a lending standpoint if I want to lever it. But at the end of the day, I could have a singular holding entity for all my real estate. Consolidate it very easy. And then if I pass, for example, I pass away, you could say I'm just eliminating everybody now, right? I pass away, my wife has a really easy transfer. I'm holding that in a trust. I'm going to use a living trust on this. My wife is already a trustee. So there's an LLC that owns a bunch of other LLCs that own the real estate. And it could be an LLC, LP, whatever you decide. And there could even be a land trust that flowing into this. It could be a Wyoming statutory trust flowing into this. Whatever it is, we have a singular holding entity that's held by my trust. So if something happens to me, it's really simple. My wife just steps in as the manager of that entity. And if something happens to my wife in the trust, it just denotes the new trustee. And we'll get to that of who we pick on these types of things. But it would just be somebody else is designated to step in and handle that asset on the bet for our estate. For our cash, these are non-risk assets, stocks, bonds, your brokerage accounts in general, savings accounts, et cetera. If they're larger accounts, chances are you're going to be holding them in a limited liability company. And it could be a disregarded limited liability company, an LLC, for tax purposes, meaning that there's no tax return due on an annual basis. It's really simple. Your name's not on it. The reason that we use those, by the way, is because I like jurisdictions where your name's not attached. And then even if somebody got a judgment against you, they cannot liquidate the asset. They cannot force a distribution. They cannot manage the asset. They literally have a lien against it, and that's it. And those ones, nobody gets because they're not worth anything and they might end up paying the tax. So as a matter of course, that forces a settlement. And I'll give you an example. $32 million claim settled for less than $2 million. That's what it does. It takes a claim, and this was dead to rights liability, but because there's no guarantee of getting paid, and it could be 50 years, 100 years, never getting paid. There's no guarantee of getting paid if you're the plaintiff. You're willing to take a much smaller amount now, and it forces settlement. So I like consolidating my estate so that it's really easy to transfer things. And I'm going to give you a visual. Let's say that we're going to go to Europe and we're going to spend 6 months traveling around Europe. And you have to bring your belongings, you have to bring, your luggage and all this fun stuff, right? Could you imagine not having luggage and just bringing your clothing and your toiletries and whatever else you're bringing, your computer, maybe some work stuff? Could you imagine just carrying that in your arms? Could you imagine what that would be like walking around Europe with all here's your underwear falling on the sidewalk, right? The whole idea is that you're not ever going to do that. You would never walk around. You would actually put it in a piece of luggage. And you might wheel that luggage. It might be a large piece of luggage. It might be a small piece of luggage. But whatever the case, you're going to take all those individual items and you're going to place them in luggage. That's what you do with an estate plan. Our luggage would be probably a living trust, which can be a dynasty trust. It's the same term. A trust is a legal document that you create where you're the grantor, you're the trustee, and you're the beneficiary during your lifetime. And then if something happens to you, there's provisions that kick in. Something happens to me, half the estate locks away for the benefit of my spouse and my descendants. And voila, somebody's there to manage it. It would be my spouse. Something happens to my spouse, her half gets locked for the benefit of descendants, gets combined with my half. And voila, we have a singular trust for the benefit of my descendants for a minimum, in my case, of 365 years. In your case, it could be whatever. And we could decant it, make it forever. So it makes it really, really simple to have a comprehensive plan. And, it could be for health, education, maintenance, support of your kids or your descendants, which could be, again, descendants could be your lineal descendants. It could be brothers, sisters, all that fun stuff. But generally speaking, it's going to be bloodline down and adopted kids being included, unless you want to exclude them. But you could be very, very specific. Hey, it's my children and my children's children and my children's children, their children's children. So my children's 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 children, just multiple generations. And it could be something that is set up that covers health, education, maintenance, and support. It's called HEMS. And that's what bank trustees and professional trustees are used to dealing with. It means stuff that you're not going to be homeless. You're always going to have a vehicle. If you want to go to college, you're going to have college funds, things like that. And then you could be a little more imaginative and say, hey, if you want to invest, I'll match things or I'll loan money out of the trust at a low interest rate. Whatever the case, you could put other provisions in there to encourage certain types of behavior, but nobody owns it. So if that kid is really bad with money or has a broken picker, as in they keep picking the wrong spouse, it doesn't mean that asset's going to get taken away. So we put these things in place. We protect our assets, we consolidate them, and we make it very simple so that everything passes on. It's just I'm carrying luggage. I'm carrying luggage along with me during my lifetime. That's the living trust, is that roll-on luggage. I can open it at any time and take anything out of it that I want. When I pass away, there's written instructions as to who gets to pull the luggage and handle the luggage, and who opens it up and how much they take out of it. That's all a living trust is. Don't make it more complicated. It becomes irrevocable when you pass away. And by the way, if you have a mixed marriage, hey, kids from previous marriage, things like that, you need to have a living trust so you don't disinherit. Somebody's going to get disinherited if we don't put together an estate plan on that type of thing. Now, number 3, incapacitation planning and end of life. It's absolutely going to happen. One of those two things, or two of those two things, 100% certainty. You're either going to pass away without ever being incapacitated, or you're going to get incapacitated and pass away. It's about a 50-50 shot as to incapacitation, especially if you get over 60. You're going to need some sort of long-term assistance, period. So it's critical that even if that occurs, like let's say that I have to go into a nursing home or residential assisted living or whatever accommodation allows me. Like in some cases, you have no choice. You have memory care. I'm sorry, you're going to be in some sort of 24/7 facility because nobody can care. Like I had a father that went through this. My dad went through this, had sundowners, violent at night. There's no way somebody can watch him. Has to go into a facility so that there's nurses. And even then, he would attack and stuff like that. Like he would get discombobulated. It's a horrible disease, by the way. But there's no way you're keeping that person at home. And rather than sit there and hope and wish and pretend, you're going to say, hey, if this type of thing happens, let's make sure we have a plan for it. My personal preference is that you insure for it. And you can insure for it with either a long-term care plan. You can insure for it by getting insurance, like life insurance, which will probably be our fourth step here. But you can have access to a good index universal life or whole life plan that you'll have a rider on it to where you can access that death benefit during your life to cover those expenses. So you're not depleting your estate. But we know it's going to happen. So we're going to have to cover it. Incapacitation planning and then end of life. End of life, you're going to use a living trust. Do not use just a will. Now here's the punchline. When you do a living trust, you still have a will. But we call it a pour-over will. And a pour-over will points to the trust as the sole beneficiary of your estate. It actually makes it extremely simple. If something happens, we're pointing to that living trust saying, this is the arbiter of all matters in my estate. And so instead of going to probate court and saying, here's all the assets, remember, we have all of our clothing that we're carrying around with us. If I do not have a living trust, I do not have luggage. I'm bringing it all and I'm dumping it to the court saying, who gets the underwear, who gets the t-shirt, who gets the pants. And it's all being inventoried in front of the court. It's all a public record. It's expensive. It's time consuming. In some states, there's statutory amounts that they have to pay. And like in California, I think it's 8% start, and then it goes down depending on how large the estate is. But it starts off where the personal representative is getting a set amount, percentage of the value of that estate, and the lawyer is getting a set. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars for a larger estate. Or you could do a living trust and avoid it. Let me think about that for about 2.3 seconds. And a living trust is not a public record. And a living trust allows us to create a legacy. Why the heck would you do a will? It just guarantees that I'm going to give the entire estate to somebody and the judge is going to sign off on it. I'd prefer to avoid that. I want to trust. I want that to be my luggage. And instead of having each item of clothing and my toiletries and everything else, and like this is the thing about toiletries, right? I always look at toiletries as being your rental properties because they could explode and get all over your other clothes, right? So it's like having shaving cream right in your luggage, but without putting a plastic bag around it or putting it in a toiletry container. You would never do that because if you're on the plane and the shaving cream explodes, it ruins all your clothing, right? That's no different than this guy sitting in your estate. It's being carried around by your living trust. I got my LLC in my luggage. I want to make sure that if something happens, that it stays inside that container. And then the luggage is just my living trust saying, here's when you can take items out. And we want to avoid having court involvement. So to the extent humanly possible, we want to, and we don't want to have our affairs put in a public record. So what we're going to do is a living trust, and we're going to have a pour-over will that says the sole beneficiary of my estate is that living trust. So that if I leave some clothing at home that I didn't take with me on my trip to Europe, right, it's going to go back into the luggage. It's going to get put in there afterwards. I can do that. And then I can have written instructions as to who gets to raid the luggage. Who and under what circumstances do you take things out? That's so important. If we do that correctly, we can prevent all sorts of nasty things that occur. Point number 4, we know we're going to pass away. I don't care how valuable your estate is. If you're listening to this and you're of modest means or you're just getting started, here's the truth. This body here, I can insure. I could put a $500,000, $1 million policy, whatever I can qualify for, and I could just have term, cheap term. And guess what happens when I die? If I died untimely and before I was able to make my fortune, guess what happens? That money could be dumped into an estate. And let's say that my values are, hey, I really want my children to travel. I want them to do mission work. I want them to better society. I could put that in my living trust. Do you know that? I could say, it's really important to travel. My trust will pay for a reasonable trip, reasonable accommodations outside of the United States for 7 to 14 days a year. If you're a beneficiary, you have the right to come to our trustee and say, I would like a trip. And the trustee is directed to pay that to allow them to travel the world. Make you a better world citizen, right? You get to see what's going on around the world. You can even put other conditions on it. You could say, but you can't go to the same country twice. Can't go to Paris every year. You got to travel. You get to choose that. And even if I don't have a ton of money, life insurance dumps in and covers it if I pass away before I make a fortune. Anybody can create a really cool legacy plan for their kids. What if education is super important? Like on my dad's side, he was the first person to go to college in his whole family. And he was like, grandma had 14 brothers and sisters. Grandpa had like 13 brothers and sisters. It was like a huge family. They all left to work in the fields, literally. My grandma, I think, was 5th grade. So education was something that was important to my dad, right? That might be something where had he actually done this, I wish he had, he could have created an estate plan that said, hey, education's really important to me. If you go to college, there's absolutely funds here for a qualified 4-year degree or 2-year degree or whatever you put in there. Accredited U.S. institutions. And then your trustee says, hey, this is really important. Hey, any beneficiary, so great grandkids, right? We're multiple generations down the line. Here's money there. And you say, but what if he didn't have a bunch of money? Insure yourself. That's why life insurance is so important. Life insurance is important. Really, there's 3 things. Number 1, it will fund your estate plan for sure. It could also fund buy-sell agreements and things like that with partners if you have other businesses together, but that's a topic for another day. But life insurance, if you have passing away and you know what's going to happen, you can have permanent life insurance. You can get life insurance that covers that sort of thing. Or if you're just getting started, you can have term insurance really cheap so that if something happens unexpected along the way, your legacy is still implemented. Number 2, it gives us access to cash tax-free. When we have the right type of insurance, if we're doing IULs a whole life, then when I am in retirement, I have access to tax-free money. I can borrow against that policy. I don't even have to pay it back. When I die, it gets paid back. So I have a nice income stream when I die. And number 3, I have access to the death benefit and the cash value if I become disabled or if I have medical needs or if there's something there that is going to be expensive. Rather than liquidate my estate, rather than sell off my assets, there's something there to cover that. So life insurance actually is a critical component to most higher end estate plans. There's other things like, hey, if I'm giving to charity, if I'm giving a lot of assets over, let's say I'm doing a charitable remainder trust, I have a family foundation or I have a family public charity. Any of those things that I'm taking money out of the estate, you may say, but I'm going to insure myself because I'm going to get a bunch of tax benefits for those. Maybe I'm taking the tax benefit and I'm investing it into life insurance so that I'm replacing the value of whatever I gave away out of my estate and putting it back when I pass away. And life insurance proceeds are not taxable. So I could have whatever it is. Let's say that I'm giving a ton of money to a family foundation. I give several $1 million. I have tax savings, let's say of $1 million. and I use that $1 million to fund a very large life insurance plan. Now, when I pass away, not only is my family foundation ripe with cash, but also I have a ton of money in my estate still. And that's how this stuff works. And if you're not doing it, you're leaving money on the table. So I'm going to say that's good enough for part one. That gives us an idea of how we would set up our estate to be successful, right? We have our living trust, we have our entity structure, we have an asset protection structure that's preventing our assets from coming in and taking our personal assets away. And also I'm isolating those assets and protecting them so that if I do something, they cannot take that away. Because remember, we're creating a legacy. This is going to go on for hundreds of years. I got to make sure someone doesn't come in and take it. So that if I'm 80 and I cause a car accident, that I didn't just ruin everything that I created, right? I can do that with this type of structure. And I'm putting it all together. I'm making sure that I have good insurance. I'm using my insurance wisely for the 3 reasons I was giving you. I created a nice consolidated estate. I've created my luggage that I'm going to carry it around with. I've protected the items, and now I can freely travel, right? I say figuratively around the world, but allows you to travel around the world from an economic standpoint and not care about what happens if something happens to you. It's going to happen. 100% certainty we're all going to pass away. We're all mortal. So we may as well plan for it. And there's a good chance something might come along and there might be a disability. We've covered that too. What a great start to creating a legacy. All right, that's the end of part one. Part two is coming up. And what we're going to address on part two is what to do while you're alive for your estate plan. And we're going to get into specifics about planning for your businesses, buy, sells, who should be your trustees, all that stuff. The specifics of the living trust, what type of provisions we use, we'll get into those. Now, if you like this type of information, I'm going to ask you to do me a huge favor and click the like button and to subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed. If you like these types of videos, you want to be put on notice when they come out, you can click that little bell. And then if you know people that would benefit from this information, please share it. I could tell you I've been doing this for 25 years. And when I first started, living trusts were the realm of the ultra wealthy, and attorneys would routinely turn away lower income folks. And I don't just say lower income, the bottom, not 80%, 90%. Oh, it's only for the wealthy. That is not true. There was so much bad information out there. There still is. And so we're combating it. This is how we do it, is we share good information and good estate planning so that somebody can create a legacy. I don't care who you are. You can create a legacy too.